Hey everybody, welcome back. This is the final stage of this E4OD rebuild we've been doing, and we have basically 100% of the transmission is rebuilt. It just has to find its way in here. So we're on that stage. We got all the guts built. The case is prepped, which I'm going to talk about as I'm building this thing to show you what I did. And everything is right and tight, and as soon as we get the pump in, you'll see, because this is not going to take very long. It's not like one of my hour videos that had total explanations. You're going to see how fast this thing comes together. So let's get to it, and stick around, and this thing is going to be money once it's done and in the truck and running down the road. So stick with me and let's get to it. Okay, so here we are. This is where it gets interesting. So we have all the guts and all the case ready to go. All this needs to do is go on top of here. But what you gotta do, and this takes serious strength, but all you have to do is this. Gotta use the force. And voila, the transmission is basically 90% built. All the guts are in the case. Did my Gone in 60 Seconds. Love that movie, by the way. And so all we got to do now is put this thing on its back and bolt the valve body on. And I told you it wasn't going to take very long. So we are looking really good now. Next, we'll just bolt the valve body on and put this thing in the truck. Just kidding. It takes a little more work than that, but we're going to do the assembly on this thing and get this thing right and tight, and you'll see by the end, this thing is money. It's ready to go in this F-250 and head down the road. So stick around, we're going to get to it. Okay, we got a whole case prep, and as I'm building this thing, I'm going to explain everything I've done with the case prep, if you remember from the last video. But the first thing to go in this case is this low reverse piston. It's got the lip seals. If you come in a little closer, it's got the lip seals. What I like to do is just run my fingers across them and kind of squeeze them in so this thing just pushes right down. But what you have to do, it's all about the juice. Just lubricating the seals. And then what we got to do is get down in the case. And when I prep this case, if you remember, I sanded this surface and this surface with 600 sandpaper. So there's no scarring or any soap scum or anything like that. So the new seals have a perfectly good seal surface to ride on. So all we're gonna do is put some juice on the case, get that ready. A little more on the inside. And then stick our low reverse piston down in the case. That's the first thing to go in the case. And hopefully this thing just plunks right in. Get it to where the seals ride, maybe move a little bit, and fell right in. Look at that, that's money. And then we have our return spring for the low reverse. Now this is where it gets a little interesting. If you look down in here, I put 2 marks on here just so you can see it. But there is a lube system, a small hole in this pocket right here that comes from the bushing from the output shaft and the lube system that feeds this hole. And this is the next thing to go in the case. This is the low reverse Sprag race. There is a lube hole right here, and that comes in there's a tiny lube hole that feeds lube to this roller clutch. So that's feeding a roller clutch, and that has to be timed with that hole. So what I do is I just take my permanent marker and I mark where the bolt holes go in between the lube hole. Pretty simple, just so I know. I mean, we'll get it right, but that's just so you know when it's bolted in the case. So what we're gonna do is bolt this down in the case right where that lube hole system goes. That way we know our low reverse roller clutch is getting lube. Pretty simple, but it's that important, because if you didn't and you got it off one, you basically lose lube to that low roller clutch, and that thing will burn up in probably 10,000 miles. So we're gonna do that, and then we're gonna keep building this thing. Okay, at this point we got our low reverse piston in, we got the spring in, and what I normally do is stick my hand down in here and hold the Sprag race and push against the springs and get my bolts started in the back of the case. You just got to put some good force on that Sprag race and get it going in and get all your bolts started. And then pull this, get my hand out of here, and then turn around the back. And if you look at this bolt on the Sprag race, just nice and even. Tighten up your race. No problem. And then use my torque wrench, 25 foot-pounds. Is the spec for it. And just torque the bolts. And that thing's good to go. Okay, at this point we have our low reverse piston in. If you look at it close, we got our piston in, slid right in. We got our spring, the return spring, and the Sprag race, and the oiler is in the channel of the case that it needs to be. I got my marks there so I know it's right. And then all we're gonna do is put this low reverse clutch in. Got to wave first. And then all we got to do is stack this thing up. Clutch steel, clutch steel. Pretty simple. Get that in there. Plunked it down. And then if you look at this, we got down to about 5 snap rings, and this is actually one we're not going to use. We replaced that one. But you can see this is the snap ring because none of the other ones would work. So we're going to go ahead and put our snap ring down in there. And at this point, I'm going to air check my low reverse. Feel the clearance, feels good. That's probably about maybe 35, 40 thousandths. I like these nice and tight too, but not too tight. Right in the spec. And then we're gonna air check it. You good, you good. Now, if you look at the clutch, that thing is money. There it is. So low reverse clutch is good. I'm gonna line these clutches up with my pick because that's gonna get a little difficult getting that drum down in there. We'll see how this goes. They're a little bit off. Let's go ahead and give it a shot, see how easy this is. So at this point, we're getting ready to put the low drum in with the Sprag race, the roller clutch. We're gonna lube. And let's see how this thing works out. Spinning it clockwise, splining the clutches and the roller spray, the roller clutch. Working it easy. And it went right in. Spins clockwise, locks counterclockwise. Beautiful, done deal. So that's ready to go, and then next thing in, because I have it all together, lube on my bearing, and just plunk that down in there. Rear hub, good to go. And then the next step is going to be putting the output shaft in with that snap ring. So that's going to be next. But we have our low reverse clutch, our low roller clutch and drum, and the rear hub ready to go. All right, at this point we have our whole rear assembly in, the low reverse clutch is in, it's all happy, air check, and I have my, this is actually just an A500 case that I use for my rebuilding. That's my support instead of having it just on the bench. So at this point, I'm just gonna take the case, put it on the bench, and we just got to put our output shaft in and our rear parking gear. So I've already lubed this up, it's ready to go. Just got to put that on there, nice and flat against the case. One thing I want to talk about is this is part of the case prep I did. I put this rear one-piece bushing in. We talked about in the last video. That's all Loctited in. The lube hole is lined up, ready to go. Got my rear thrust washer in. The rear Sprag race is torqued, everything's good. And we got our parking gear. That thing's good to go. Little lube. And then this is the output shaft. 600 where the bushing's right, everything's happy, splines are good. Ready to go in. Just got to spline it down. Little lube in the bushing and the shaft. Just so there's nothing dry when this thing first fires up. It's like it's been running for 20,000 miles. Stick my output shaft in. And then what I generally do with this is put the output shaft against the bench. So everything's tight in the back, and then spline this in. That way I can get my snap ring in, which it's fighting me a little bit. All right, so we got our output shaft in. I got the output shaft against the bench so it stays fully seated. got my rear hub in, and all we got to do is get this snap ring on. This is one of those snap rings way down in there, but just gotta expand it and get it on the shaft without distorting the snap ring. And sometimes they can fight you. You just got to be patient. And click, went in, and turn it, and that thing's good to go. So, snap ring is in. We're good. Spinning happy. Everything's good so far. We'll just keep moving on. All right, we're good with the output shaft. The snap ring is in. All I'm gonna do is transfer my case back over to my home fixture. Nice and easy. Now this thing is supported solid, it's ready to build. Well, one thing I would like to note is this is the Planet I'm putting back in this truck. It's an aluminum 4-pinion, so it's heavy duty. It's not 3-pinion. But say if I was to be building a super heavy duty transmission, or say this guy was towing a backhoe or a skid loader, I'd be putting the 6-pinion steel Planet in it like I'm doing on the front. But this Planet, this is the one to come out of it, and it's heavy duty, but it's not super heavy duty. And this is one of the reasons I like to custom build transmissions. If you were to go to a big box store company, you're gonna get what you get. But I know every single piece that has gone inside this transmission, and I can custom build the transmission for the vehicle and the use of the vehicle. So we're not going to upgrade this to a 6-pinion Planet because he's not doing any crazy towing. I mean, this is basically going to be a Sunday driver, but you know, he's going to church and all. But that's the reason we're not putting the 6-pinion Planet, steel Planet in this thing, because 15,000 pound trailers with load on it. So we're going back with this, and also with the valve body. I can put whatever shift kit in it I want. As far as customizing the transmission to the vehicle and its use. And that's why I like doing everything in-house, because you never know what you're gonna get when you just buy a transmission and it's on a crate. You gotta bolt it in and hope for the best. But this way, I know every detail of what's going into what the vehicle needs. And that's every transmission. It's not just heavy duty trucks or whatever. Drag racing, it's all the same. But you can tailor the transmission to the use. And that's the point that I do that. So we're going with this Planet. We're going with this shift kit set up in the valve body. If this thing were to be hauling a backhoe or a skid loader, I might be putting super heavy duty clutches in this thing. But I'm not doing that on this vehicle because this thing will go 200,000 miles without an issue for what he's using it for. So that's why we're doing that, and we're gonna go from there. All right, at this point, we got our rear Planet we just talked about, and then if you look down in here, we got our low reverse clutch, low hub, everything's good to go, our snap ring, output shaft, it's all happy. All I'm gonna do is throw a little oil down in there. Pre-lube everything. Everything should be pre-lube. And then we're gonna put our rear Planet in. And then what you gotta do is you gotta spin clockwise and lift this low drum up, because there's a snap ring that holds that in. Just like that. You heard that clunk. And we're getting down to very few snap rings now. We're literally down to 3 snap rings in this trans. Just stretch it a little bit. No big deal. And then get it in the groove. and that popped right in. All is happy. Good to go. No issues there. Now, at this point, we're ready to load this whole rear assembly here. Now I got a cool tool for this, but if you don't, there's a couple ways you can do it. You can lean the transmission on its back on the bench and load this very carefully. The hard part is getting your hands in there, but it is what it is. I got a cool tool for it, so we're gonna do it the cool tool way. So all I'm gonna do is lube my bushings. Little juice on there. Flip this thing over, keep it all together. And then this tool holds it all together as I'm putting it down in the case. And this thing works money. It works great. So I'm gonna just put my tool on here. Get the lugs in. That way I can put this whole thing while it's standing on my fixture and I don't have to worry about anything. So that thing's good to go right there. And now we have our whole assembly already assembled and it's good. A little bit on the thrust washer and plunk this thing home. Carefully, you don't want to damage your bushings. Nice and easy. Boom. She's in. Undo my tool. We're already halfway with the transmission, or at least the third, I should say. Now I just got to get my tool out of there. Done. And spinning stuff, making sure everything's happy. It's all good. We're looking really good at this point. Now, I got to put my band in. Now this band here, if you look at this band, well, I already soaked it, but I put trans fluid on the band, pre-soaked the band, everything's good there. Just got to get the band down in here. It's your overrun band, engine braking. Get that down there in the lug, everything's happy. I usually take my pick and go through the servo hole just to make sure everything's good. It's gonna apply, no problems, that's good. And then just keep moving forward. That's all we're doing here. So we're gonna start, we got our band in. Now we're gonna put the second clutch in. And got our clutches here. They've been soaked. Got our second clutch pack just like that. Goes down in the case. That's your pressure plate. That goes in first. Nice and easy. Plunk it in. And then we just start loading our clutches and steels. Easy peasy. Beautiful. Borg Warner. Not moving my cheese. And then the thickest plate. This is the thickest plate. It goes against the piston. But, all right. We are halfway through this trans at this point. Got my second clutch in. Now, we're gonna put our center support in. There's a bearing in here. I'm gonna put some lube on it. Now, I got all this pre-lube air check. I don't even have to put lube on this thing. It's so happy. I'm gonna make sure that my thrust washer's got enough stuff on there, because that popped off on me before. Now we're going to put our center support in. A little lube. A little more lube. Really don't need it, but I like to do it. And then carefully put our center support in. Get it down where it kind of sits on the rings, and then just push it in. Okay, now looks like we got an issue. Oh, hold on. We got our snap ring for the center support that we had machined down. So that snap ring's got to go in first. Now what I like to do with these is, if you look at this here, this is where the lugs aren't. I like to have the opening of the snap ring where there wouldn't be any support anyway. So now we got our snap ring in. Now I'm gonna put my center support in again, and hopefully that's gonna bottom out right on that snap ring. Now, we got our snap ring in, we need to check our end play. If you remember, the Sonics kit came with that end play. So at this point we have our center support in, it's bottomed out on the snap ring, and now we're gonna check our end play. So we'll do that next. All right, so at this point, if you come in close, I got the center support, the main center support in. And if you remember on those Sonics thrust washers, I had the thrust washers in there, and that was taking up some end play. And I had that all in there, and it was too tight. So I took all that back out, and the way I check my end play is just get in here to the forward drum, and I push down on the center support and pull up, and I didn't feel, there was a little bit of play, but very little. And I took out 20 thousandths of shim. So we have about 25 thousandths rear end play, which is perfect. Not too tight, not too loose. So that's good. And then now, this is probably one of the most important things of this rebuild. If you look at these, they give you new feed bolts with Loctite on it. And if you come around here, oh, let me get my 13. We're going to start our feed bolts for the center support. And do these by hand, get them going. They're kind of tight. But see how that's rocking? What I want to do is get that thing centered. If you look at this really close, see how that bolt is not in center? We want those exactly centered so these bolts aren't hitting the case sideways. So we just got to get them started. See how it's rocking around right now? Just got to get both of them down to where they just start contacting the case. Getting close. And then get this one good. Just snug them. Just doing this by hand right now, just to get them where they need to be. And then if you come back around, these bolts are super important to torque right, because there's a gap here, and if you torque these bolts too tight, then what it does, come back around, it'll warp this whole case right here. So 12 foot-pounds, that's where they need to be, no more. The reason they won't come loose, even though that torque isn't very much, because it has the Loctites on the bolts. So we're going to torque them to 12 foot-pounds when I do the valve body, but I got this thing centered. Everything's happy there. So we got the center support in. It's all good. Now we're basically ready to put in the main overdrive and second pistons. And then there's another feed bolt That feed bolt holds that one in. So we're gonna go ahead and put this in, and we got a large gap here that this piston needs to go to. And we're just gonna put this down in here. Everything looks good. Got my hole there. And just get this thing going down in there. Everything should be happy with this. Spin it. Now that's hitting the piston down there. And actually, hold on one second. We got our second gear, second clutch return spring. That goes right there first. And then we put piston in. Nice and easy. Nice and easy. There we go. Now we're looking pretty good. Get it centered where that bolt will go in, no problem. And that is all ready to go in. We have our return spring for the second gear, overdrive, and second gear piston are in, center support's in. Now, next we're just gonna use a tool. That's pretty cool that I made a tool. I kind of mimic the actual tool they use, but next we're gonna go ahead and press this down and get this all ready to go and get the bolt in the case. So that's next. All right, so at this point we got our center support in, and we got to put our snap ring in first. This holds the entire assembly down. So we're gonna get that in there. As far down as we can get it. And then what we gotta do is they make a tool. I actually made this tool myself. These are two parts of it. So this is one part that I use on the center support itself. And then this is actually just a 350 low reverse tool. This here. And I put that right there. And then we got this piece that goes in the case, about right there. And this is very close to the original tool that they used to make. They do make different tools, but this is what I've been using forever. Works fine. Tighten my bolts up. Tighten my bolt up. And then I just crank my 350 low reverse tool. If you don't have tools, you can make them. That's all you got to do. But this works really good. And basically at this point, we're just compressing that second gear return spring till we can get our snap ring in. Boom, there it is. Nice heavy duty snap there. I like it. Everything's in, it's seated. All is happy. And then just take my tool out. Take the whole thing out, and that is seated in, good to go. Snap rings in, right and tight. Center support is in. And if you look over here, you look down in this hole, my center support isn't quite centered. So I just got to move it to where it's centered. I'd like them to be perfect. And then I can put my bolt in. and I do not torque these bolts until I have everything in and that snap ring is in. That way I know everything is good. And again, that looks pretty good. Yeah, we're centered. You don't want that bolt to be off kilter with the case, because then it won't go down evenly. But that's happy. Right now I'm just gonna leave these the way they are. Just kind of put a little hand torque on it. That's probably about 6 foot-pounds. And then we'll torque them when we do the valve body. But that's all good to go. So everything's ready. We're getting close here. Basically just the overdrive and the pump, and then we're done. We're done with this. Bolt the valve body on, put it in the truck. Okay, we got our center support in. We're basically come down to 80% done. As far as the guts go, we gotta just have the overdrive assembly, which I'm gonna put that all in at once. Just lift this off the pump. What I usually do, or what I'm doing, is put my shaft in there. So I got something to hold on to. And I lube my bearing, everything's good. Just put this whole assembly down all at one time. Kind of get a little cock, just so it doesn't plunk too hard. And then find the splines and get it home. And that thing is, everything is in there all at one time. Beautiful thing. So just make sure everything's happy. And then next thing to go in is the overdrive clutch. We got our overdrive clutch here. I soaked the clutches. Soaked all the clutches in this trans at this point. And then put our steel in, because the piston's coming up this way, so you need a steel first, and the pressure plate is last. Clutch. Oop, not right. That's right. Clutch. Not right again. Clutch. And the pressure plate. And then our last snap ring. Now we're getting somewhere. Last thrust washer, bearing, and snap ring is in the trans. Done. Now what I'm going to do is air check this real quick. Just to make sure it's happy. Come through the feed hole. And that is obviously money. So that's your overdrive clutch. And we got good clearance here. Just like that. Happy. Now, last but not least is the pump. Stupid important, but it is what it is. That's the last thing to go in here. So, come over to the kit. We're running out of parts here. Got our pump O-ring and seal. Very simple. Now what I'm gonna do is just put a little assembly lube on the case. And stick my gasket on the right way. Make sure the holes are lined up perfect. When it's moist outside, there's moisture in the air, humidity, these gaskets will swell, so you got to be careful with that. It's a little humid out, but it's not too bad. Everything's good. Just got to make sure you line them up right. Everything's happy with that. Then we put our pump O-ring on. Very simple. Make sure it's seated. Now I'm checking my snap rings. Just once again, just checking everything. Make sure everything's right and tight. Snap rings in for the pressure regulator valve. And this is another area where you got to be careful of these scarf cut rings. I'm going to go ahead and put a little bit more lube. Now that I've air checked everything, I want to make sure these aren't going to pop out when I put my pump in. So I'm going to go ahead and just put a little bit more assembly lube on these seals just so I know they're not going anywhere. And then put a little bit of juice on the bushings, front and rear. So we've got overdrive assemblies in, pumps ready to go in. At this point, I sanded my hole where the sealing ring goes in, just so I wouldn't have any issues getting the pump in. And I know it's gonna seal good. So I'm just gonna put a little bit, get the pump in. Doesn't take too much, but you gotta get it liberal. And we are looking good now. Home stretch. A little on my pump O-ring. And you want to make sure this is fully coated for sure, just to get the pump in easy. And that looks good. All is happy. All my bearing, everything is lubed right and tight. Seals are good. And this is the final step to 85% of the transmission being done. And we are good. So what I do, put my input shaft in here. That's gonna help guide the pump into the trans. That's gonna help center the pump. So when this pump goes in, it is just happy. So we got that. Make sure my gasket's good. All's right with the pump. And we're gonna plunk this thing in. Nice and easy. Just kind of get an idea where it goes and get it right down. I got the seal against the case. It's ready to go down into the case actually, but at this point, I'm gonna take my bolts and we're gonna work that out. But right now, I got it really done deal. Okay, we're almost done here as far as getting the guts of this thing. The pump is ready to go in. One thing I wanna show with these bolts here, basically you got your bolt and you got your rubber sealing washer. But what I like to do is I use the black Ultra Permatex and get a little on the end of the bolt, just a little bit, and then some on the washer. You don't want a whole lot of this because then your job looks messy, and you ever use this stuff, you get a whole tube. When you tighten this down to seal it, don't over tighten it. I'm pretty sure they do this for a reason now, but that thing will crack right there. So all you gotta do is snug it just a little bit. If you over tighten it, that cracks and then it just starts drying. In about 3 weeks, you got dry Permatex, you gotta buy a new one. So don't over tighten that. It's not a big deal, but it is important. And you see how far I've gone with that one. She's about done. But all I do at this point, I line up my bolt holes. I haven't pushed the pump in yet. Start all the bolts. Keep going here. I'm going to show you something on this. This is pretty cool. It's something I didn't do when I pulled this transmission apart, but I'm going to show you now. Makes it a lot easier to get the pump out. Doesn't look like you're beating the crap out of the transmission. So, if you look down in here close, if you look down in this pump, this is the stator part, and there's threads there over here and all the way on the other side. All you got to do is take your tail housing bolts and run these down in here when you go to tear a transmission apart. And then all you got to do is use your hook tool, and without damaging the case, you pull your pump out like that. It works so much easier than hitting the input shaft or whatever. That worked just fine. I didn't damage anything, but you work this side by side and that pump comes right out. So that's just something I didn't show on the teardown. Figured I'd show that now because that's the reason for those being there. So we get our pump bolts in. Everything's good. They're lined up nice and happy. And then what I like to do here, I don't like to hit it down with a hammer. What I've always normally done, sometimes you got to knock it in with a little hammer. I get my Bruce Lee on here, and then you focus your energy and then push it down. And that is right and tight. So that's how I like to put my pumps in. That way I know if I got to hit that thing in with a hammer, there might be a seal or something that I didn't feel when I put that thing in there. So that's the reason I do that, because that thing clunked in, and pretty positive I didn't cut a seal or anything like that. So that's why I do it that way. But that couldn't have worked any better. And a lot of that has to do with sanding this pump, the case where the O-ring goes in, and it slid in nice and easy. So all I'm gonna do is put it on the lowest setting on my gun and just cinch them down. No torque on it. All I'm doing is cinching the bolt. And then torque this thing to 20 foot-pounds, and the pump is in the case. 20 foot-pounds. Start going around, cinch them up. Get them happy. And then go back and make sure I got them all. Every time, always recheck torques. Never know when you're going to forget a bolt. And that way you know you're positive your trans is good to go. And that's it. That's it for the pump. Kung Fu grip. I'm going to take some pliers and turn that shaft, make sure everything's happy. But everything is looking good at this point, so we're just going to keep moving on. We got the entire transmission is built as far as the guts and the pump and the case. And we're just gonna keep moving on here. We got to do the valve body and then we're done here. So we're looking good at this point. Okay, now that it's all together, I want to talk about end plays real quick. And this is very simple, but it's super important to make sure the end plays are right in these things, or any transmission for that matter. But you have two different sets of end plays. You have the rear end play that goes between the center support and the rear, the last bearing behind the low hub. And then you have the overdrive end play. So if you come in close, you can go in this hole very carefully and you can see the overrun clutch drum and just lift it with a screwdriver and there's about 20 thousandths there, and that's your overdrive end play. It's from the pump all the way to the center support. And then for the rear end play, you can take a kind of a thin screwdriver. Now, if you look at this close, the direct drum does not have any relation to the rear end play. Your rear end play is between your forward drum and the center support all the way back. So what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna take up, the direct drum is just kind of riding free. So I'm gonna lift the direct drum to where it hits the sun shell and then lift again and you'll hear a little clunking. That's my rear end play between the forward drum and the rear of the trans. And we got about 25, maybe 30 there. And once those new thrust washers break in, probably about 10,000 miles, it'll be between 30 and 40, and that's perfect. So we're good to go. Had I left those Sonic thrust washers in there, it'd have been too tight. So everything is happy there. So that's my rear end play. Overdrive end play, all the end play in this thing is perfect, ready to go. Okay, now we're ready for the valve body, and we're just gonna go through putting everything together here, proper torques and all that. First thing to talk about is these center support bolts. And we went through, when we put the trans together, I got these two torqued to 12 and this front one torqued to 10. And you saw the reason for not over torquing them, so those are good to go. And another thing I do is I take my flat file and I have an upside on this thing. Whenever you use a flat file, they will always have a curve to them. So you always got to find your up, just mark up. So, because if you had it upside down and you went to flat file this, all you would be getting is this edge and this edge over here without hitting the center. So you always want to take your flat file and find the upside of it so it's curved like this. It's not much, but it's very important to do that. And then I just flat filed any high spots off this whole case, which everything is looking good there. So we're gonna start with that. We got that going. Now I'm gonna put in my second gear servo. Little lube where the pin rides. Got a new one of these. Nice, and the rubber's nice and flimsy. The old ones, if they're really bad and they burn up, you can just knock it on a bench and just crack a whole piece of that lip off. So you generally always put a new one unless that rubber's like brand new. And then stick this in here. And you can see right here where my band is applying. So I know it's in the lug of in the lug of the band. So we're good there. Next, check balls. We're gonna put new check balls in this thing. Get our check balls out here. Now when I tear a transmission apart, unless there's 45 check balls like Toyotas, I generally count as I'm taking it out. Now there's 8 in the case, and then there's 5 in this other valve body, the main valve body part. And I counted that in my head for that reason. Now I know there's 8 and 5 when I'm going back. So all I have to do is figure out 8 check balls for the case. These are the big ones. That's 2, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. And if you remember on the teardown, we did mark these, but 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, and 8. And there's none in this bathtub, which, let me show you that real quick. We got our separator plate here. And if you put this thing down where it goes, right here is where that bathtub is. And there's not 2 holes. So that's why we're not putting one there. So 8 check balls in the case, got our check balls in, got our servo in, got our center support bolts tight, torqued properly, and we just keep moving on here. Next, we're going to go ahead and do the separator plate and the gaskets and all that. All right, before I get too ahead of myself, I usually like to air check as I'm putting the valve body on too. So we've already air checked everything twice already. We're gonna do it 3 times, but just to show you, this is actually, all this is here is a pen taken apart, and these things work great. I got a bunch of them. Got little ones, big ones, but these things work great for getting down in certain circuits and air checking and getting that hole. And you can air check your clutches like that. That was second gear I just did. This one's leaking a little bit because the center support is on an angle, but this thing works really good. This is a low reverse for air checking. It's perfect tool. They're free. Find a pen anywhere. And for any of you sniffers out there, that's the reason I got these tubes laying all over the shop, because I like to use these for air checks. So all our air checks are good. Now we're ready for the separator plate and gaskets. Okay, one more thing is these things came in the Sonics kit, if you look at them close. And they're actually seals to go down and seal the center support should there be any leaking between the center support and the case. I've never used these before, but we're putting them in since it came in that kit, and we got one for the direct clutch and one for the second clutch. And basically, they just go down in there and seal against the center support itself, so there's no chance of any cross leaking between the case and the center support in those 2 clutches. So we're gonna put them in, and then we're ready for the valve body gaskets. Okay, at this point, got our springs in, center support bolts are nice and torqued. All the check balls are in. There's this little filter up here. I usually just put it in with a little semi-lube, make sure it doesn't fall sideways when I'm putting the plate on. So that's good to go. There's this little electronic pressure control relief valve. That's if the valve sticks, it doesn't get crazy pressure. And that relief valve goes in here, and this is a Sonics one. Instead of just a check ball, it's a little plug. And that goes right down in here, and that seals against the separator plate. Now what I'm gonna do with this, I got my separator plate ready, got all the soap scum off, sanded, got all the gasket material off, everything's happy. Got my correct valve body gaskets. And this one here goes against the case because it has this long nub on it that seals the low reverse feed pipes. But what I'm gonna do here is just take some of my assembly lube and just stick the gasket on the plate so I know that the holes are lined up perfect. Just a little bit, doesn't take a whole lot. And I got the other one glued. The holes are lined up perfect. Got my filter in here. And then we're just gonna stick this on here too. And line the holes up perfect. And then just stick it on there. Good to go. Everything's happy, right and tight. Got my check valve, all's ready. So we're just gonna stick our plate on. And keep moving forward here. Now, the first thing I'm gonna do is put my solenoid pack on to hold this down good and tight, because you can see how it's not against the case because all the parts in there. So all I do is a little juice on there, a little on the O-ring, new solenoid pack, and just send this thing home nice and easy. Line it up and push it in. And all I'm gonna do is hold it down while I get these finger tight. Get one on the corner. And cinch it down with my hand, just so everything is happy, which it is. So we're good to go there. Coming along here. And next we're just gonna start bolting our valve bodies on. All these 30 torques. And we got one more. Running out of bolts. Won't be long now. And there it is. Last one. Hand tighten these for now. And we're just gonna keep moving forward. Okay, we got our separator plate on. We got our solenoid pack in. Everything's happy there. Next, I want to put this the part shaft and the ship lever in. This is a rubber seal. This is something pretty cool that I do with the rubber seals. Anytime you got a rubber seal, say axle seal that just goes rubber to a case part, all I do is get a little spin on it and then knock it in. And it works a lot better than just trying to put them in dry. You can rip the rubber, but this works really good. So anytime you have a rubber seal and drive it home and that thing's good to go. That's one of my favorite hammers. Haven't showed that one yet. That thing will do some damage. And then we got our shaft here at 600 where the seal rides. This thing has had seen better days. There's so much rust in this truck, it was crazy. But we're just gonna get this is our part mechanism. Gotta make sure that thing's not stuck. And we'll get down in there. Get this right. It's in there. And then just put our shaft in. Get it lined up, and our nut. Get the nut on, get it seated carefully, and then just tighten it up. Crank it pretty good. Just so I know it ain't going anywhere. And then make sure everything's free. Then there's this little roll pin that goes down in here to keep the shaft from moving in and out. Just kind of go until that thing starts. And then knock it in, not all the way, because that thing can be hard to get out if you punch it in too far. Hopefully it never needs to come out, but if it does, it'll be easier. So got our part mechanism good to go. Always checking that. Plumped in. That's good. Now you got your detent spring. And you wait till this is last, because if you were to try to loosen this when you take it apart, you have to have the spring off, because it'll just bend that spring right up. So you always take that out first and put it in last. this can be a little difficult. Not too hard, but it's one of them things that's gonna fight me since I'm doing the video. So we're gonna get that on and torqued, and then our linkage is happy. Just like that. Torque that, and we're good to go. Okay, moving on with the valve body. I'm gonna go ahead and put this main one on. And one thing I like to do is just put a little bit of pre-lube on the valves, especially if they were steel, because any moisture, and if this thing sits before you fire it up, you can get a little bit of rust on your valves, and they may stick. But these are anodized valves, but I like to do it anyway. So we're gonna just do that. This thing's ready to go. Put this on. Line up my manual valve. Plunk it home. All is happy there. Now with this one, this is that main valve body, all the Sonics shift kit stuff and everything. So bottom line is, once this is on here, if I do need to and I don't like the shift feel, I can pull the pan, the filter, and just this one valve body off the front to adjust any shift feel issues that I'm having. So otherwise I would have just set it up like I always do and it'd been perfect, but we're doing this new Sonics kit. And one thing I'd like to mention, my buddy Ed came by the other day, and he suggested I use the Transgo Tugger kit, and he said they work great. I would love it. The only reason I didn't take his advice on this one, this particular one, is because this guy isn't doing any crazy heavy duty towing. Should he have been doing any towing, backhoe, boats, whatever, I would have done that Tugger kit, but I figured since he's not doing a whole lot of that, we're gonna go with this kit, and it's gonna work perfect. But if I ever do a heavy duty E4OD 40100 in the future, and it does some crazy towing, I'm gonna use that Tugger kit. But as of right now, we're going with this Sonics kit, and I'm just gonna go ahead and put this on here. Little lube on my valves. And plunk this thing home. Make sure everything seats good. This thing's ready to go. Now what I'm gonna do is put a few bolts in here, and just so this thing won't move. And use my speeder wrench just to get this thing down snug. Just a little bit. And then what I'm gonna do is put this valve body on. There's 5 check balls in this one. We got 2 big ones and 3 small ones. So we got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Now I just remember that from when I tore it apart, but we're gonna look at this real quick. We got 2 bathtubs here, and then 1 ball here, and then the 2 big ones. So what I like to do with this is put a little bit of assembly lube on the case, just so when I stick this plate down on here, it's not flopping all over, and I get the bolt holes lined perfectly. And then put my upper valve body on very carefully without moving that plate. Kind of eyeball. I mean, this isn't completely necessary, it's just something I like to do. And then the 2 shortest bolts I like to run down. These 2 here. Whoop, not that one. That one here. And run it down. And I know that my valve body is aligned perfect with that plate. And carefully just kind of cinch them down. way I know everything is happy. So that's good. Now we're just gonna put all these bolts in here and torque the valve body. All right, now we got all the bolts in and they're cinched down by hand. There's two things I want to talk about with valve body torquing. And one is, I never bolt a valve body to a trans case when it's really cold outside. And it's kind of a theory of mine. I've never heard this talked about, but what I like to do is I like a valve body and case to be at room temperature. Because if you think about it, any metal, when it gets cold and hot, when it gets colder, it contracts, and when it heats up, it expands. So what I like to do is to bolt the valve body down to a case at room temperature. That way, it's in the middle of the extremes of what it's going to go to. So I bolt it down at room temperature, then it can get down to 0 degrees and contract that much, or get up to 200 or whatever degrees and expand that much. But the initial torque of the valve body is at room temperature. So it's kind of in between those extremes. So I've always been that way. I've been doing that for 30 years. It's never failed me. So I do that, and then we're gonna go ahead and torque this valve body. And what I like to do is start in the center and just work my way out. So I'm just basically 100 inch-pounds on that, and then just start torquing these bolts. One at a time, no big deal. And just keep going. Super important to torque valve body bolts, or torque anything for that matter. So we're looking pretty good there. Now these are super important. A lot of times people will forget them if they're in a hurry. You'll lose, you won't have any reverse because that fluid pressure will just leak out. And just keep moving forward here. And get the 30 from a solenoid pack. And we are almost done here. And get my 10. Get all these stud nuts. And that should be right and tight. And like what I like to do is I'm gonna let this thing sit here and soak for about 5 minutes, and then I'm gonna go back and recheck every one of these bolts. I always do that. I double check, because you never know when you're gonna forget a bolt. And the last thing you want is when you pull the pan to do a service and you see a bolt or 2 or 3 laying in the pan just for that reason. So 5 minutes, I'm gonna retorque this. We're gonna put the filter on, the pan, and we're about done here. Okay, wrapping this thing up. We got our valve body torqued twice. All the bolts are good. Got our linkage correct. Just checking and rechecking, that's all I'm doing. Basically, we got our 4-wheel drive filter. I'm gonna go ahead and put that in. A little bit on there. Plunk our filter in. like that. Now we're putting a new pan on this for one reason, and this new pan has a drain plug on it. So when you service it, it's a lot easier. And I got my magnet cleaned up and on there. Always put your magnet back in. And this is the old pan. This is the old high horsepower pan. We'll probably lose about 10 horsepower getting rid of that, but it doesn't have a drain plug in it. So we're gonna go ahead and do that. One thing I want to talk about is this. We had to order this separate. This didn't come in the kit. This is a nice rubber seal. It's got 2 ridges on it, proper places for the bolts to torque down and not over torque it. We're putting that new rubber seal in there, but this is the one they give you in the kit. It might as well just be cardboard box. They've been putting these in kits for about 10 years now, and I don't know who engineered these gaskets, but I hate them. It's basically just cardboard with a little spray on it, but you over torque these bolts and they just split. They literally just split. So these are basically good for to fill your garbage can. That's about all they're good for. But we're getting rid of that. I'll never use one of these. Anytime I have had to use these because I couldn't get something else, but since the factory rubber gasket, you have the opportunity to use that, I'm using that and getting rid of this. I'll never use one of these in this trans. So that's gone. We got our pan, got our filter, all is happy. And we're basically just gonna put our new pan on here, plunk it home. And if you remember on the teardown, we had all these bolts. It had 10s, 12s, 13s, oh my. But I went over to my handy dandy toolbox that I store all my stuff on. This is all my metrics in here. And I found some 10mm bolts that'll work. And we're just gonna replace all them with the same 10mm bolts. So I'm gonna stick these in here and get them all on. I'm gonna torque these to about 13 foot-pounds, and then we're almost done here. Okay, wrapping it up here. We got our pan on, torque, 13 foot-pounds. Got all the good bolts in it. One thing I didn't show you is on the teardown and the case prep, or the case prep itself, we had to put, only had to put 3 helicoils. I thought there was gonna be a lot more, but I did the helicoils in the case and fixed the case, and I didn't over torque these pan bolts, so they're good to go. And then basically just gotta roll this thing over. She's heavy now. And gonna put my neutral switch on. I'm gonna put a little bit of anti-seize on here just to keep it from rusting, because these things will stick to the shaft. But that goes on there. And if you look at this really close, there's a mark here for neutral, and all you do is line up the mark. You put it in neutral, line up the marks, and then bolt this down. And then we got these these 2 shafts. This is the old one. There wasn't much left of that thing. And actually the owner of the vehicle, he's a master at finding parts. He scoured a junkyard the other day and found this good one, so you can see the difference. I'd hate to see that shifter cable pop off because I didn't change that. So we're getting rid of that. And Rich, thank you for all the parts searching you have done on this truck, because otherwise it would take me that much longer. So we got our new linkage. Gonna bolt that on, and then the torque converter. There's a seal here. The seal's inside the torque converter, and just gonna put some assembly lube on there. And we got our seal, scarf cut. Got to get it in right. Gonna make it small, and then just stick my seal on. Get that thing good and happy. And then converter is ready to go in at this point. And with the converter, this is a big converter. It probably holds 6 quarts of fluid. I'm gonna put at least 2 in here, 2.5. So it's about half full. So when you first fire it up, nothing is dry in the trans, and it'll help prime and get the converter filled up faster if it's got fluid in it. So you always do that. And check my hub. This hub is perfect, it was replaced. But if need be, a 600 the hub on this thing to make sure it's perfect. No issues for the seal. And this trans is basically done. One thing I didn't do is the tail housing basically just bolts to this, but being a dummy, I didn't run this through the machine. So I got to hand clean all this up, no big deal. And then torque that on there, and that's good to go too. So this trans is done, ready to go in the truck. And the only thing, real quick, you walk under the truck here, we got the transfer case here. I'm leaving this alone, it worked fine. I'm going to change all the input seal, output seal, and the output seal to the front. You can see actually it was leaking a little bit, so we're gonna change that. And that should be good for the transfer case. We got our new rear drive shaft. This was a Dorman drive shaft, cost them $600. And this thing has all Spicer U-joints and Spicer joints in it. I mean, a beautiful drive shaft for $600. You can't beat it. That's already been in the truck and running. I know there's no vibration issues with that. And then come in here, we got our pipe in. I bolted the flywheel on. That was in the last video. I did the rear main seal, but I have this flywheel bolted in, ready to go. I Loctited these bolts with 242 and torqued to 75 foot-pounds. The spec was 79, but we talked about that, so that's good to go. Check my converter hub on here. We did that in the last video. I'm gonna put some grease in there just so everything's happy. And when I bolt this thing up, anytime, this is the most important part of R&R in a transmission, is when you get this trans up here, you get the converter lined up in these holes for the studs on the converter, get them through, and you always hand push the transmission to the bell housing. And then once you got it tight, you make sure that your converter is free. That way you know your pump isn't jammed and your converter's all the way in the transmission. So we're gonna do that. And trans is done, going in today. And we'll be road testing this thing soon. So that should take care of that. Okay, that's it. The whole ordeal is done. Trans is ready to go in. And thank you everybody for watching these videos. It's been an experience for me trying to explain everything as I'm building it. And I hope you guys learned something from these videos. I know there's a lot of good information in there, but thank you all for watching, and we will see you soon. I'm gonna be putting this thing in, and I'll let you know how that valve body situation with the Sonics valves works out, whether I had to pull the pan back off and adjust a few things. But we're gonna see. Hopefully this thing is money down the road, no problems. If not, I'll just change a few springs in there, be done. And this thing is good. Should be good for 200,000 miles. So thanks for watching. We'll talk to you soon.